And welcome everybody. Hello, it's time for Rowing Chat again. I'm Rebecca Caro, and this month, Tara Morgan. Tara, welcome.
Thanks, Rebecca. Happy to be here.
Now, tell us a little bit about yourself. How come you came?
I've actually learned to row back in 1986 as a teenager, and was always very active and loved the sport. I got back into the sport as a competitor and a coach about 10 years ago here in Seattle, Washington.
Specialist in rowing and aging. This is new to me. Tell me how you came to this.
I actually got the opportunity to coach a group of people at what's the Mount Baker Rowing and Sailing Center here in Seattle on Lake Washington. I got the opportunity to start coaching a group of rowers who meet at what we call midday. And midday, of course, to rowers is 9 o'clock in the morning. So this group meets at 9 o'clock out on the lake, and they are a mixed bag. Our oldest is 82 years old. A lot of them have been rowing for 20 plus years. Some of them have Olympic backgrounds and national team backgrounds, but many of them are your typical senior rower who came into the sport late in life and just love being out in nature and outside and having a good physical challenge. So I've been with them about 5 years. And the topic of rowing and aging has become really relevant in terms of how to keep them on the water and how to keep them having a satisfying experience in a respectful and challenging way. So that's what we try to do every week. We meet 3 times a week. And I also work with disabled rowers in the more traditional sense. So finding the similarities in the accommodations that we make for rowers as they are less and less able to get in and out of boats or carry things. So it's all sort of come together now as this rowing and aging project. Yeah.
Tara, that's amazing. I'm delighted that we've met and that you have picked up such a really interesting and growth area of the sport. Now, I'm going to backtrack right. I know that in our listeners, we've got people who have rowing clubs who might consider running let's call it a rowette, and would from your so you and I talked separate things which are important, and these are the worst and that we need to learn from. So the first thing is, let's talk about programs.
Right. So each boathouse, as we all know, has one of 2 ways of operating. One is private rowers who store their own equipment and row by themselves or in small special interest groups, we'll call it. They may be coached or not coached. They may hire a private coach at times. But those are the people who are often rowing in singles and doubles with friends and not in a formal program. Then you have boathouses where it's a coached program that's a structured time and structured equipment and goals, even if they're in regattas or if they're just out for recreational rowing. And we try to address both in terms of making it a really satisfying experience. The programmatic piece, I think, is really interesting in terms of deciding whether it's a recreational endeavor or a competitive endeavor, what is best for your population and your boathouse, where's the social aspect of it, what are your programs, we have a program here at Mount Baker designed for a wide spectrum of rowers, and it's called long distance rowing. And it's a great successful program that was created on Sunday mornings, and they go row 20K in big boats together. So in some cases, it's appropriate to set up special programs so that you can broaden the attraction. In terms of the people rowing the small boats and the private clubs, those people, and I think in order for them to stay engaged longer, do need to be more formalized. You'll see often an elderly rower taking out his single out of a club, and other rowers in the club might express some concerns about that person's ability to carry their own equipment, to steer, to be not a safety concern on the water. So that might be a situation where you might need to create a program like a recreational sculling group that gathers all of those people up and provides a little bit more of a safety mechanism as well as a social aspect. Yeah.
So the second thing on a rowing and aging project is policies. Talk about the policies a club needs to have in place.
Yeah, so policies in terms of, and the word that I like to use is accommodation. Rowers that need accommodation. And that can be anything from, like I said, carrying your own equipment to getting in and out of boats to being able to do a self-rescue. A lot of it is safety-based. The policies that I've put in place are things like we cannot take an 8-man shell out of the boathouse unless we have 10 able-bodied boat-carrying participants on site. If we don't have that number, we just take out smaller boats. We take out 4s and quads, but just to make sure that I've got enough bodies and enough hands and enough attention on that shell, we have a policy of a minimum of 10 people. Some other policies we have is we get in by pairs because we call it pre-flight boarding, actually, where the coxswain will say, does anyone need extra time? Everyone holds the boat. The bow pair gets in. Whoever needed extra time gets in first while everybody stabilizes the boat. This is a new policy after we realized that if everybody's in the boat and that person gets in last, there's a lot of shenanigans happening in the boat. People are doing their feet, people are doing their spacers, and the boat is not set and it's not stable, and they could go swimming if we're not careful. The other policies that we have is around the float test. Our boathouse has a very strict float test policy. You have to be able to pass one every 3 years. I liken this to kind of when, you know, when mom really shouldn't be driving anymore. If you can't pass a float test, we need to have a conversation. The other opportunity that I gave my elderly rowers last year was you can take out a single if you can push yourself up onto a dock, meaning if they flip the single out on the water, they can at least get themselves into my launch boat and then re-embark into the single, as opposed to trying to right themselves in the single itself. This way they can swim to my boat, get up into my boat, and then we put them back in if they want to keep rowing. That's a test that we run every summer so that people who want to row a single become eligible. All they have to do is jump off the dock, swim around for 5 minutes, and then push themselves up onto the dock. So it's kind of fun. Everybody likes to jump in the water. So, and in terms of their medical histories, we don't require that they tell us what's going on. But I try to be a coach where the door is open. We have a gentleman who rows for us who had a stroke a number of years ago, and the fallout of that is that he's become less, has less of a filter when he speaks. And so that kind of policy around how you address the coach and how you address the rowers is really critical, because we've always got that curmudgeon, you know, in the boat who likes to make a joke or something. But creating that policy, really a cultural piece of a respectful exchange, where you are still the authority, you're still in charge, even though they are sometimes three times older than you. You know, everybody likes to have structure and discipline. So having all these policies in place is really good. And the last one that I'll mention is taking the boat out of the water and carrying oars. We have developed policies. We carry oars at our waist. We don't carry them on our shoulders. We call that concussion height if you carry them on your shoulders. And then when we take the boat out of the water, we go up to waist first and then up over our heads, because we want to make sure we've got the boat, everybody knows where they're going. And in some cases, we go ahead and have slings on the dock and they just plop it right into the slings right there. Up over heads can be really dangerous and kind of a vulnerable spot for people with the bad shoulders and the arthritis in the hands, and plus they've just come off the water. So
good. What's the last thing to build on the programs and the policies, of course?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Equipment. What are the equipment needs of a rowing and aging program?
Okay, this is kind of my big disclaimer to boathouses. Folks who need accommodation doesn't mean that they have to get the bottom of the rack boat. Okay, so folks who need accommodation does not mean beginner. And so I think when I came into senior rowing and people that I've talked to, they often feel like they get the oldest boat in the boathouse, the one that if they break it, it's okay. They know what you're giving them. They know that it's not the best maintained equipment. Sometimes they know it's the oldest oars. And I don't think that that's really a fair way of doing it. Every boathouse that I've worked at has lists of what boat goes with what level of rower. Some of my folks would qualify as advanced rowers, but because we have such a mix, we go with a medium range of our 8s. We have Pococks, of course, because we're here in Seattle, we have Pococks. I think when you're looking at your equipment and assessing your equipment, you want to make sure that you have a wherry or a wide-bottomed boat for singles and doubles. You want to look at having stern-coxed boats versus all, bow loaders. Bow loader for an older population is not an option. And also sending out a straight 4 or a straight 8, or a straight quad, isn't always smart either, because you have people with neck issues or vision issues often at that age. The other piece of equipment that I would really like to have people think about is having either a low stool or a yoga mat, just an old yoga mat that comes with your group. It's dedicated to your group. That goes on the dock for the people who need to get out a certain way or get in a certain way. Not everybody's docks are the cleanest, or maybe they've got splinters or they're just slippery. Having an old yoga mat, and don't leave that up to your rowers to provide that. That's just something that's real easy to obtain. A low stool or a footstool even to get the rower from standing to sitting to the dock into the boat and backwards up the chain. I think that's been something I've used in both the adaptive rowing, the more traditional para situation a lot, and that's worked well in this group. The last thing I want to mention is the spacer tool. We have a rower whose son is very genius. He's really, really smart guy, and he's made a tool that helps to push spacers out, because not everybody's thumbs work, and those boat spacers can be kind of tight. And that's something that we'll be talking about more of, these kinds of adaptive, cool little gadgets and toys that's been developed with the rowers here in Seattle.
Are the height adjustments or lower it?
Yes, yes.
I was thinking about your mucky dock and thinking about ours, which is covered in goose poo and swan poo.
Right.
Never mind, I think a yoga mat would be a good thing. We will get one.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Tara, we've got a load of questions from listeners who've signed up ahead of time, and I'm very keen that you pepper your answers with as much anecdote as possible, because what I think will be thinking as they listen is, how do I adjust my own coaching style and method to suit a new group like this? So our first question comes from Western Australia, from Jennifer Matthews, and she says, it looks like you have a very diverse group of rowers. What's your strategy for creating an inclusive program for everyone?
Yeah, this is a great question. Seize the Oar is the club that I formed about 3 years ago. And that's exactly what we focus on, is how to help you as a boathouse and you as a coach be and maintain inclusiveness. We call it sustainable inclusiveness. And I think it starts on land. I think, you know, look at your boathouse and always ask yourself the question, what can we do? There are many, many options for people to be involved in the sport. As we know, some people are only indoor rowers. Some people are both indoor and outdoor. Some people will never touch an ergometer in their life, by their choice, of course. And as coaches and boathouse directors, our response to a rower that might be challenging to us because of their need for accommodation, our proper response is, sure, why not? It's not, we'll see, or, you know, hemming and hawing. It's sure, why not? Come down, be a part of the process in figuring out which program fits you. For some people, it might be your 10 o'clock in the morning indoor rowing group that they would be perfectly great to start with. You might end up purchasing equipment if you have enough interest from a certain population. I just really want to encourage the sense of inclusiveness and the sense of curiosity around people who need accommodation, because and not because it's the right thing to do, which is a lot of the motivation, but because people need to be healthy. People need to have a place to work out. People need to be part of communities and tribes, and that's why we row, and that's why we love it. And having the door open, whether it's your coaching staff or your equipment or your options, is critical, I think, to keeping the rowing community as diverse as possible.
It has an aspect that you mentioned earlier, which is social.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys go out for coffee afterwards? How does that work?
You know, I've heard a lot of great stories. I know a lot of people listening know Stan Pocock from all of the writing, of course, that's been done out of Seattle and about Boys in the Boat. Stan Pocock's got, before he passed away, there's a group called the Ancient Mariners. It's a team here in Seattle, and they're exactly what you would imagine when you see the word Ancient Mariners. A lot of them are former Husky rowers or college or naval or Olympic even rowers who get together and compete still. They also are very much about their coffee. So they always have breakfast and coffee. And a lot of them would get together with Stan Pocock before he passed away after practice and just talk rowing and talk life. The group that I coach, we have a potluck twice a year. One of the potlucks, which is great for me because they all know how to cook, which is nice for me. And we give an award every year, and they nominate someone for this award called the Cut the Cake Award. So if you're aware of the drill, Cut the Cake, we have a Cut the Cake Award. Yes, right, Cut the Cake Award. And this is given to someone who has really been an integral asset to the team. The other social part I want to mention is we keep a log of who comes to rowing, and we keep an attendance sheet. It's both for financial purposes for the boathouse to track people. It's for coxing duty purposes. Your number is high, that means you cox. But once a month, the captain of the team, who's a peer for them, and I sit down and look at the list and note who hasn't been coming. And we have what we call the circle of care, and we make a round of phone calls to those people and just check in. We know that life happens, but in some cases we have found out that that person's spouse was very ill or they had a rowing career-ending injury or illness, or they just, maybe something happened at practice that just, it didn't sit well with them and they hadn't thought they could come back and we didn't know. And I think that keeping that door open and having that captain, the ancient mariners have a role called the commodore, and that is a peer as well. I think that social aspect is important for the coach to be a part of, and not when you get off the dock, just the coach walks away and doesn't watch and doesn't participate. We always have a debrief after practice. We always talk about what was fun or what worked and what didn't. And that adds to that social aspect. I'm very strict, however, about things like talking in the boat. I like to have complete attention in the boat because while we're very welcome to people saying, oh, look, there's an eagle, or look at various things and help us out, making sure that when we stop and we stretch, you know, we're checking in. And there's a lot of that happens. I think we really value the circle of care.
And that's a fantastic thing to do, I think, for any group, but particularly, as you say, for yours. Now, we have a question from Dick Moers from Potsdam, from the Grateful Oars Rowing Club. And Dick asks, why do you think that rowing has such a strong appeal to middle-aged and older people? He said, this seems to be true even of people that I don't see as particularly athletic.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you have to consider maybe those people were athletic at one point. You know, life happens in between athletic endeavors. I think that when I didn't mention this, but I teach adult learn to row. I'm doing the adult learn to row program, and I always ask, why rowing, why now, on their first day. And many of them are 40 and up. And a lot of them always say, I just love being on the water. And, you know, survey and research shows that water is healing and transformative. I think no one ever expects rowing to be as hard as it is when they start as a rower, but they always come off the water that first day and they're like, wow, you guys make it look so easy. So I think that there's a nature aspect to it. I think as we get older, we really appreciate taking that time. I think we're always looking for a physical challenge of some kind and a mental challenge to keep us lively and healthy. And I think the biggest reason is the tribal component, is the community component. As we get older, maybe our kids leave the house, our grandkids live far away, our spouses become someone we need to care for. And that hub and coming, and everyone's there for the same reason. There's no doubts, there's no considerations. We are there to row. And I think that people can take comfort in that. And then also get a great exercise that exercises the brain, exercises the body. You have to navigate your social skills. You have to turn off part of your executive function a little bit so that I can help you be a great rower for the day. And I think that our retired CEOs, if you will, kind of like to have a day off where they don't have to think and they don't have to be in charge. Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, the community aspect.
Dick, I would also add, to echo Tara's findings, because I also teach an adult learn to row, that I think rowing, because it's a seated sport, has a couple of additional benefits over other sports. You're supported. So if you've got knee or back problems, you know, you can still sit down and participate. And the fact that everybody in the crew boat, once you're on the water, moves at the same speed, there's no perception of falling behind the group. And I know that that exact same dynamic is used by community rowing in Boston, where they have a program for obese children, where the children feel that they get a lot more out of participating in rowing, because unlike running, cycling or swimming, they can tell if they're not as fast as another person, whereas in a rowing boat, we all move together.
Yes.
I'd also quietly challenge Dick's assertion that rowing is for athletic people. I think if you've
Yes,
ever
yes.
gone to, exactly, if you've ever gone to see any sport that is a community participation sport, and it could be a fun run, or it could be a cycle, and myself, I decided to learn ocean swimming last summer. I will say it was not a great success, but I did try. And when you go to the classes, it's really important to notice that there are lots and lots of people of lots of different shapes and sizes, and that nowadays we do need to be a lot more inclusive and less judgmental in our attitudes, particularly, I will say, in swimming, where there are people who look like whales, and trust me, they move like porpoises. They are fast. And I didn't know how to do it.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think when you're attracting people to the sport, I think what's great when you get older is you kind of let that stuff go. You know what an athlete doesn't look like and does look like, and you just kind of throw all that away. And you just know you like to be in your skin, and you like to move your body, and you like to be in a boat. I want to mention a program called Ed that's here, based here in Seattle, and it's a indoor rowing program for middle schoolers. And they take ergometers into the PE classrooms and teach the PE teachers how to do erging and rowing. And the PE teachers have come back and told the organizers that it is the single most equitable PE activity, because we all had that experience in our school days in PE where we were the slow one or we were not so coordinated, and that no one comes into this program knowing how to row. And so everyone starts on the same page. And I think it's a similar concept out on the water. You know, if you looked at the photos that we've collected over the project in the last month of the rowers, you would be very impressed with the spectrum of body types. And a lot of people have come to me with replaced knees and replaced hips and overweight issues, everything on the gamut. And there's always a spot for them. There's always a seat for them.
I totally support what you're saying there. Mm-hmm. Now we have a quick question from Jackie Bailey Tucker, who's from Trafford Rowing Club, which is near Manchester in England. And she says, as a very active rower aged 48, I'm not getting any younger. What are your thoughts on pain avoidance?
Avoid it. Yes, definitely. I think that, you know, I believe very strongly in self-advocacy. I think you should always be really open with your coach about anything that might be going on or any concerns you might be having, because it might be fixed by a coaching tip. If you're the type of rower that is a fixer, as we say, and you decide that you want to lean out of the boat the whole practice, and then all of a sudden you have a back issue or a hip issue, you know, we can sort of track that back. If it's something that's happening in your body externally, outside of rowing, I mean, then yeah, we can definitely address that. I have people who row for me who experience a lot of pain when they row, and when they're in an 8 together, I actually use that person as my barometer of how hard we need to go and how well we need to go, because we don't want anybody left behind. I think it's helpful for me to know what's going on with the rower. But I also would advise that person to be proactive. I know using gloves can help with grip. If you're starting to see some tendonitis or having arthritis in the hands, there's a brand of gloves called Crew Stop gloves that are very low profile and thin. A lot of older rowers like to use those to have a better grip on the oar, because the over gripping, because you might not feel confident about your hand strength or your upper body strength to hold onto the oar, that can really start to deteriorate in your shoulders and arms. I would also say the same thing about having a seat pad. Adding a seat pad when our core and our back is starting to show some degeneration, the seat pad allows you to sit up a little bit more, and you know, one of the gel type seat pads is good for that. You know, I think when you're working out some bumps along the way, using an indoor rowing machine to sort of test yourself and how you're doing with the basic rowing technique before you go back out on the water where it can be very unstable, I think is really wise. You know, if you're coming off of an injury, I have many rowers who come to me and say, you know, it's been 2 months, I had knee surgery, and we have a lineup that's appropriate for them. But I think just having your coach have that door open and not just saying, well, just get over it and move through it. It's my job to have you walk out and have a great row. So
we're going to take a short break now to hear from our sponsor. And today we want to ask, do you know what the #1 injury suffered by rowers is? It's blisters on the hands. Yep. Although blisters may sound like a minor injury, they're actually very painful and they can stop you enjoying your rowing. There are many homespun remedies for rowing blisters, but Rowperfect believes prevention is better than cure. Rowing gloves protect your hands and help to prevent blisters. They're sold in 6 sizes, and these gloves are designed for rowing with a snug fit, elastic to allow your fingers to bend, and a synthetic suede palm. 2 palm designs exist for a textured grip or a smooth palm, so you can choose textured for your inside hand where you feather. Go to the shop rowperfect.co.uk/shop and click on the sidebar category gloves and blister protection to see the full range. And these are the same gloves that Tara just mentioned.
excellent.
Hey,
that
we didn't
works.
plan that. We didn't plan it, did we? Back to Coach Tara, and we've got a quick question here from Karen Clark, who's in Tampa Athletic Club in Florida, and she asks, what do you see as the best balance between cardio and strength training off the water? And she says she's 60 years old.
I just want to do a shout out to Tampa, because Tampa, I just got connected to them through our project, and they have a rower there who is in his 90s, and his children row and his grandchildren row, and we're really excited to hear from him pretty soon about his thoughts on getting older on the water. So shout out to Tampa. Thanks for participating in our project. So strength and cardio training, I think you always want to consider a couple things. I don't know anything about you. I don't know anything about your condition. I can't give you specific things, but I can tell you that rest becomes more and more and more critical. I always encourage interval training rather than just go hard for an hour on the erg or go hard out. Building in kind of getting to know your on and your off and what that feels like in your body is really, really critical as we get older, because it changes. I don't know if people are familiar with the RPE scale. It's the rate of perceived exertion scale, and it's often posted in your gym or it's easily accessed online. This is your perception of how hard you're working. And we want to make sure that when we're training for rowing, that you're training yourself in a controlled environment off the water that gets you ready for that moment when you've gotten to your edge, right? If you're in a competitive program, there's drawbacks to the fact that rowing at a competitive level does require a level of discomfort that I think as we get older, it's kind of a double-edged sword with the level of discomfort. You know, rowing is a lot about suffering. It's a lot about getting through things and no timeouts and no substitutions. We always say that in rowing, there's no timeouts. And when I was speaking to a local doctor about the older rowers that he treats, he attributed a lot of the injuries from off the water training mixed with on the water training to that culture of suffering. And I think when we get older, we don't need to be there as much, be in that spot as much, as exciting as it might be. So I would say making sure that your recovery days are really recovery days. They're active recovery days, as we say. You go for a good walk, you maybe do some yoga, you mix in cross training that's relevant, stairs, hills, stationary bike. I would not spend as much time on the ergometer unless that's your only thing and that's your jam, if you really like it. Moving the body in a different way. I always encourage a lot of core work that goes with rowing, taking care of your back, of course, disclaimer. And, you know, looking at a week of rowing, it might not be a situation, excuse me, where you're rowing 3 days a week and then you're doing 2 days of strength training to go with that. But making sure that there's still those afternoons off and days off and good food and good hydration. I don't know if that's specific enough for that listener. It's hard for me. Yeah, I mean, I'm a personal trainer. I'm a certified personal trainer, and I often give workouts to people to do. So if that person wants to reach out to me and just kind of share their more specific concerns, I think as we get older, my rule of thumb is that recovery is your friend. Recovery is definitely your friend, and water, of course.
Now, Paul from Camas Rowing Club in the northeast of the UK, Morpeth, has said, I've never found any benefit from strength training. Is that unusual?
I saw this question, and my question back to him was, how do you know that it doesn't benefit you? What's the measuring tool that he's using? I would say that if he's using an erg score as his measuring tool, that could be also a technique issue. If he's noticing that he's not gaining any muscle mass, that could be a nutrition issue. I'm not sure what his goals are, if he wants to, you know, be the Hulk, or if he's, you know, or if he's looking for a lower erg score. I think we can't dispute the research around weight-bearing exercise being helpful as we get older, whether it's body weight or actual weights. If it's not working for him, I would say try something else. I mean, I wouldn't beat a dead horse there. I would say try something that is fun and enjoyable and challenging. One sport actually that I've found that's kind of new to the scene for us here in Seattle is kettlebells. Kettlebell training is a cardio and weight, and most important for our older rowers, agility and coordination. I always encourage my rowers to do activities that are weight bearing, but also require them to know their right foot from their left foot, their right hand from their left hand, because that's the cross midline brain activity that's really critical. We have a rower who has Parkinson's disease who rows for us, and we are always working on some cross midline agility training and remembering right hand from left hand and making sure the brain is talking to both sides. It's one of our favorite things to do on the water, making sure that we're using the language as a coach. We don't always say port and starboard. Sometimes we say right and left, just to keep the message clear. And before we go out on the water, we definitely do some spinal hygiene, we call it, training, just to make sure we can know what side is what. Because we don't have people who are dedicated port or starboard unless they have an injury or an issue that
I think that's
requires
a very good idea.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, Anne Shaley from St. Paul, Minneapolis is a coach, and she, like you, says she coaches a diverse group of rowers, but one is in his 60s, and she says he lacks the flexibility to get into a good catch position. His legs splay out to the sides and has a very rounded upper back and very tight hamstrings. Do you have any ideas or tricks that she could use with this guy apart from stretching?
Sure. I think I have the same rower, by the way. I have that rower. Most men I've found have hips that are very narrow and very tight. And then if they've been in a desk for many years, sometimes if you're talking about a 60-year-old rower, if he's had a career where a desk has been part of his life, that kind of adds to it. Those hip flexors are constantly working. And I have the same rower, the knees splay out has almost no bodies over, is a very short stroke. He's 6 feet tall, and he's a heavier guy, so he really belongs in the engine room just to balance the boat out. But I've been playing with a couple things with him. Moving him to the bow pair, number one, so that the shortness of his stroke doesn't have such a great effect. I think if I'm wondering if part of her question is he's a little, how do I say it, uncoachable in terms of this. Like if you say something, he can't fix it because it's a physical issue, or he doesn't really understand it. One thing I did with this rower was I took video of the boat and just sent it to the whole group very neutrally, because sometimes people are really visual learners and they need to absorb that information on their own time. And that way he can understand when we do have a conversation and say, this is why I'm putting you in the bow pair. Focus on what he can do. You know, of course, stretching is great. I would incorporate stretching for the whole group of rowers and not singling out anyone. I think as I've noticed this, with this population, singling out people, good and bad, can be a problem sometimes if they're feeling particularly sensitive about their rowing technique or about their day. I mean, you don't know what's going on. So visually showing him how it needs to be on the ergometer in a controlled environment. I use the imagery of a yoga block. He needs to only spread his knees enough to hold a yoga block in between them, so they need to come in a little closer, making that a goal for him, showing him how to practice that on land, you know, holding a door frame and squatting down and getting up and seeing that. I mean, as coaches, we can only do so much at practice, and the emphasis is always water time, right? So that your rowers are like, why are we doing stretching? Why are we doing yoga? Why are we doing, let's go row? And I try to tell my folks who are what I consider problematic in terms of their stroke length, it's very different from the rest of the boat, that if you do this kind of thing off the water, you will be a better rower for your team. So if you frame, I just know with my rower, it's a bit of a sensitive issue, that, you know, how likely are they to go home and go take a yoga class? The other side of that is peer recommendations. I have a rower who goes directly to a yoga class. He's about a 60-year-old man who is got a nice tummy, and he rowed in high school, and he's back after 30 years. And he goes to yoga right after class. And I've asked him privately to invite some of the other gentlemen to join him at a yoga class, because I can't see any of these guys going to a yoga class on their own, but I can see a little group of them going, you know, because this guy goes. And I think that peer recommendation can be also really good. I hope that's helpful.
Good. And I'd add a couple of other things. In the boat, there are two things you can do. One is lower his feet so that his shoes are as low as they possibly can be. And the other is raise his seat up so that either with a seat pad or more than that, you could take a seat off its rail mount and then put blocks of wood in it, so that by sitting a little higher, it actually makes it easier to do the rock over. And lastly, although this may not be something that they're comfortable with, to brush their teeth twice a day, as you do, because we're all good kiddies, but to do it squatted down in the catch position, so that you spend 2 minutes a day brushing your teeth in that position, and that can be a substitute for stretching. And of course, it can be done privately.
I also like to recommend that when they brush their teeth, they put their foot up on the counter, because they get a hip flexor stretch if they put one foot up, right?
I have visions of little old ladies in their bathrooms. Wonderful. Now, a quick question from Irene Earle, who's from Blair Island Aquatic Center, which is in California. And she says, I'd like to know how to hit the mental place for tackling erg tests and training.
Yeah, Myrene actually is with Masters Coaching, which is an organization here in the States that does camps, competitive sweep camps, actually for Masters adults. I have a teammate headed to one of her camps next week, and she's very excited. So hi, Mary. And I thought about this question. I know for myself, I shifted my thinking around the ergometer. I think we all can agree that having a strategy for an erg test is really critical in order to both measure your progress, but also to, I think you get a little bit, you feel more successful if you were able to meet your plan. I met a rower recently who switched to doing a 2K by minutes and not by meters and minutes rather than by looking at the split. For some people, the split can be challenging to look at, especially if it's not the split that you saw 30 years ago or even 5 years ago, right, for whatever reason. And if you have a strategy for getting through it, one example is if in 2 minutes you've gone 500 meters, that's a 2-minute split. So your goal for the first 2 minutes is 475 meters or more. Your goal for the second 500 is, or second 2 minutes is another set of meters, all the way up to 2K. And then you can surprise yourself. I think one thing I would also say about testing is do it often. Make friends with the ergometer, because being friendly with the ergometer, it's just a machine. It's a machine that we both love and hate. And to be proactive and curious about how you can meet your goal. I think, I've gone to some great lengths in my career, of course, as many people have, to PR. And it's hard for some people to see a number that they're not used to, and to see a number that's lower or higher, higher than they would like. But
that leads us neatly to the next question, which is from Andrew Hill from Imperial Alumni in London. And he says, I was a pretty competent rower in my 20s and 30s. I'm now 65 and coming back to rowing. What decline in performance should I accept as reasonable? And he suggests 1K erg times or some other measure.
Yeah, I've noticed there's definitely a difference in approach, and Maureen can also benefit from this, I think, as well. There's a difference in approach to erg testing, whether you've been a competitive rower in your past and you're coming back to rowing, or if you started later in life. There's a trajectory, for both. There's definitely challenges for both. I think one of the respondents to our survey around rowing and aging said that while he stopped really focusing on competing on the water, he uses the Concept 2 website and the world erg results worldwide of people in his age group. And he uses that as a way to challenge himself. You can't obviously compare your erg scores now to what they were when you were 20. But there is a healthy dose of people who are competing at a very strenuous and challenging level on the indoor rowers. And that's one way to give yourself some goals. I know this rower who responded, I believe he was from Massachusetts, said he spends 6 months trying to beat the top erg score that's there. He doesn't necessarily submit it or put it in there, but he uses it as a way to keep himself motivated, keep himself inspired, and to give himself more of a realistic goal. Yeah, I would say that.
Great. Yeah, and don't forget, Andy, that actually, as we get older, and I'm speaking from my own experience here, we can't expect every year to be good or perfect. That life and injuries and jobs and things get in the way. And I have had to learn to expect compromise. And I can tell from the wording of your question that, you use the word, could I accept as reasonable? It's
Yeah.
your own self-imposed goals that I think you're looking at, which is not bad at all, but it does show what a wonderfully competitive person you are. And of course, coming back to rowing, you can probably expect a few years of actually getting better. And so keep your own scores and good luck with it.
Absolutely.
Now, Tara, I want to wrap up by learning a little bit more about your project. You've referenced a survey a few times. Tell us a bit more about what you're planning on doing.
So I want to back up just a second. I was at the last December in Philadelphia. We were at the U.S. Rowing National Convention. And the first day of the convention is typically called inclusive. It's the business of inclusiveness, the inclusive rowing in terms of programs. And I know that when people hear the word inclusive, they often think of people with more traditional para rowing needs. And I really thought about where I was working and what I was doing with para rowers, and then raised my hand in the room and said, I just want to bring up senior rowers and older rowers if anybody wants to talk about that. And I was shocked to find people tracking me down in the lobby and saying, I have this rower, I'm in New York, and I have this rower who can't get in and out of the boat. How do you do it? And we were on the floor in the hotel lobby, like trying different techniques of getting in and out of the boat. And it came really clear to me that there was really a need out there, that no one wants to tell a rower to go home. No one wants to send a rower away or ask them to leave, or no one wants that. Sometimes it's appropriate, of course, but because they just can't participate or you just don't have a program for them, I would caution you to figure it out. But so I started this project, and it was Coach Tara's 5 tips for working with seniors. And it was really well received. And then that turned into 5 chapters of an ebook. And then that ebook became a platform for me to survey rowers around the world. And we, over the past month, have heard from almost 100 rowers from, I wrote this down so I would remember, 6 countries, almost 50-50 recreational and competitive. The oldest is 91. The average age is 67. The total number of years of experience is now 1,852 years of experience in rowing. And they're almost 50-50 male-female, which I thought was really interesting, that the older set, I was kind of expecting to hear from more men than women, but it's almost split right down the middle. So we just asked the survey question, and anyone listening can participate. We would love your input, and this will all be part of the ebook project on rowing and aging. And the questions are really simple to start with. What's your club affiliation? How long have you been rowing? Which has been very illuminating. If you find someone who's 75 years old and they've been rowing for 5 years, you're like, how did that happen? You know, how did you start 5 years ago? And then we asked them to describe the perfect stroke. And this has been the most illuminating question, to describe the perfect stroke. There's definitely a camp of people who think it's possible and people who think it's not possible. And then there's people who are very hopeful that someday they'll get one. We also ask people to complete the sentence, in order for me to stay on the water as long as possible, I need ... And the answers have ranged from better equipment, more accommodated programs, better educated coaches, more compassionate coaches. There's been issues about people feeling marginalized. Body issues, I need new knees, or I need someone who understands new knees. I need more flexible times to come rowing. I need this, that. And the last question is, please give us some advice. What's your best advice about getting in and out of a boat? And that's where the yoga mat came from, making sure that they're getting out of the boat on the side that doesn't have the rigger, you know, all of those kinds of things. So this project has really surprised me, and it's blown up quite a bit. So please participate. It's really exciting. And everybody is also submitting photographs of themselves, either vintage photographs or current. And we've heard from Olympians and folks from the 1970 Olympics and 1956 Olympics. And it's just very exciting. So come on and join us.
And our plan, just to leak an early heads up, is to publish the book with Tara through Rowperfect. So keep your eyes and ears open, and we will make that available. Now, Rowperfect has a newsletter mailing list, and we have a free prize draw that for everybody who's on the list each month. And Tara has very kindly donated a copy of The Boys in the Boat because it's from Seattle. And if the winner is in the Seattle area, she's further offered to give you a guided tour around, is it Lake Washington?
Yeah, Lake Union and Lake Washington, yeah.
Where the book is set. Now, Tara, please let the listeners know where they can connect with you.
Great. So my website is seizetheoar.com. Seize the Oar is the name of the club that I started, and that's the home of the project, of the Rowing and Aging Project. It's also a home for inclusive rowing in the entire region. So if you're a para rower or you know someone who would like to try rowing who needs some para, seizetheoar.com is how they can get a hold of me, and it's just Coach Tara at seizetheoar.com.
Well, that's very straightforward. Now, Rowperfect welcomes comments and suggestions for new episodes of Rowing Chat, or if you've got further questions about this episode, please send them to info@rowperfect.co.uk. You can listen to past episodes of Rowing Chat at rowperfect.co.uk/Rowing Chat, and there you'll see links to iTunes and SoundCloud and YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter, at Rowperfect, or on Facebook, where we are Rowperfect UK. Please subscribe to our feed, and please leave us a review and share this with your club mates, which will help other rowers getting more enjoyment from their rowing. For more information about Rowperfect UK and its educational services for coaches, coxswains and athletes, go to rowperfect.co.uk. See you next month.